She was left to die so the pack could live. The chains bit into Vivian's wrists, iron cold against skin, already numb from the blizzard. They had bound her to the stone pillar at the edge of the territory where the mountain wind howled loudest and the snow fell like knives. The elders said her barrenness was a curse, that the moon goddess had marked her unworthy, that her very presence poisoned the fertility of the pack's women. So they chained her outside. May the storm take what we cannot keep. Beta Marcus had said, his voice steady, his eyes empty of mercy. Vivian had not begged. What words could she offer to those who measured worth in bloodlines and births? She was 23 winters old and had never felt the quickening of life within her. In a world where omegas existed to carry the future, she was nothing but failure wrapped in skin. The wind tore at her thin dress, the fabric already stiff with ice. Her dark hair whipped across her face, strands freezing to her cheeks. She could no longer feel her feet. The Everwood Pack Council had deliberated for less than an hour. 5 years without conception was their measure of usefulness. 5 years of trying with 3 different males, each more brutal than the last in their determination to breed her. 5 years of monthly humiliations, followed by monthly disappointments, until finally they decided she was taking up resources better spent on fertile females. The moon hid behind the storm clouds, and she wondered if even the goddess had turned away. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time lost meaning when death waited in every gust. The cold had worked its way into her bones, a strange comfort in its promise of eventual sleep. Just a little longer, she told herself, and this would all be over. Then through the white curtain of snow, she saw movement. A figure emerged from the blizzard, massive and cloaked in furs so dark they seemed to drink the light. He moved with the deliberate grace of a predator, each step purposeful, despite the storm that would have felled lesser men. As he drew closer, she saw the glint of silver armor beneath the pelts, the ancient markings of a king's guard. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Amber, burning amber like embers in the dark. The stranger stopped 3 paces from her, his gaze moving from her face to the chains to the frozen ground beneath her bare feet. His expression remained unreadable, carved from the same stone as the mountains around them. A scar ran from temple to jaw on the left side of his face, the mark of someone who had faced death and denied it. He looked to be in his early 40s, the salt and pepper in his dark hair and beard telling of experience rather than weakness. Who did this? His voice was low, a rumble beneath the wind. Vivian's lips were too frozen to form words. She could only stare. He stepped forward, and she smelled pine and smoke and something wild. Something that made her wolf stir for the first time in months. With one hand, he gripped the chains. His eyes flared brighter, and the iron groaned, then shattered. She collapsed forward. He caught her before she hit the ground, his arms impossibly warm, impossibly steady. "You're coming with me," he said, and there was no question in his voice, only certainty. Vivian tried to speak, to ask why, to understand what game of fate had brought this stranger to her execution. But consciousness was slipping, the cold finally claiming what it had been denied. The last thing she felt was the heat of his chest against her cheek, the steady rhythm of his heart, and the inexplicable sense that she had been found by someone who had been searching far longer than this single night. When she woke, it was to warmth and softness, so unfamiliar that for a moment she believed she had died, and the moon goddess had shown mercy after all. The room around her was stone, but hung with rich tapestries in deep blues and silver. A fire crackled in a hearth larger than the entire sleeping area she had shared with 3 other omegas in the Everwood compound. "Finally awake, are you?" The voice belonged to an older woman sitting in a chair near the bed. She was perhaps in her late 60s, her silver hair woven in elaborate braids, her hands strong and weathered, marked with the tattoos of a healer. "I was beginning to think you might sleep straight through to the spring thaw." Vivian tried to sit up, but her muscles screamed in protest. The woman stood and moved to her side with surprising grace for her age. "Easy now. You've been asleep for 3 days. Your body is still remembering how to work properly." She pressed a cup of something warm and fragrant to Vivian's lips. "Drink. It will help with the pain." The liquid tasted of honey and herbs and something sharper beneath. Vivian drank greedily, only now realizing how parched she was. "Where am I?" She finally managed, her voice a croak. "Graymountain Fortress, the heart of the Northern Territories." The woman's eyes, a clear gray like mountain mist, studied her carefully. "I am Eleanor Pack Healer, and you, little one, are very lucky to be alive." Vivian's fingers went instinctively to her wrists, now bandaged where the chains had cut. Why did he save me? Eleanor's expression softened slightly. That is a question only he can answer. But I can tell you this much, you are the first person our king has brought back from his wanderings in 3 years. King, the word felt foreign on Vivian's tongue. Richard Alpha of the Northern Territories, crowned in winter during the blood moon. Eleanor's voice held the rhythm of formal introduction, though some call him the Wanderer King, for he rarely stays within these walls for long. The memory of burning amber eyes flashed in Vivian's mind. Why would an Alpha King concern himself with a barren Omega? Eleanor's hand stilled on the bandages she was checking. That is not a word to use in these halls, child. Barren. The way she said it made it sound like a curse. The moon goddess gives different gifts to different wolves. Some are not meant to bear children, but to serve the pack in other ways. Before Vivian could respond, the door opened. The man from the storm entered, now dressed in simple wool and leather, though no less imposing for the lack of furs and armor. His presence filled the room, the air itself seeming to acknowledge his authority. Eleanor stood and bowed her head slightly. My king. How is she, Eleanor? His voice was just as Vivian remembered, deep and steady. Recovering. The frostbite was not as severe as I feared. Her wolf is strong. Richard nodded, then turned his amber gaze to Vivian. She fought the urge to look away, to show submission as she had been taught. Instead, she met his eyes directly, a small defiance she would not have dared with the alphas of her former pack. A fleeting expression crossed his face, something between surprise and approval. You have questions, he said. Not a question. Why did you save me? He considered her for a moment before answering. I was walking the borders. I heard nothing, saw nothing, but I knew I needed to be there. He paused, choosing his words carefully. When I found you, it felt like answering a question I'd been asking for 3 years. What question? Whether mercy still has meaning in a world ruled by strength and survival. Eleanor quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. Richard did not sit, but moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains beyond. You lost your mate. Again, not a question. Vivian could sense the grief that hung around him like a cloak. He turned, his expression guarded. How did you know? Everyone knows. The Alpha King who walks alone, who rules justly but cannot bear to sit on his throne for more than an hour at a time. She looked down at her bandaged wrists. They said you died with her in all the ways that matter. They weren't wrong. He moved closer, his scent enveloping her, pine and smoke, and something uniquely him. Her name was Sarah. She died in childbirth 3 years ago, our son with her. The pain in his voice was raw, unhealed despite the passage of time. Vivian understood suddenly that he had saved her because he could not save them. I'm offering you sanctuary, a place in my household, he said. No chains, no judgment for what you cannot give. He held her gaze steadily. All I ask is that you stay until you're strong enough to decide your own path. And if you choose to leave, then I'll give you coin and safe passage anywhere you wish to go. Vivian stared at him, searching his face for deception or hidden cost. She found only steady patience. Why? She asked again, softer this time. Because mercy is all we have left when justice fails, Richard said. And because I think the goddess sent you to remind me of that. The days that followed passed in a haze of healing and discovery. Eleanor brought meals that Vivian struggled to finish, her stomach shrunken from months of rationed scraps. Richard visited each evening, staying only long enough to ensure she had what she needed, never pressing her to speak when silence suited her better. On the 4th day, when she could finally walk without trembling, Vivian left her chambers. The fortress was a maze of stone corridors and winding stairs, but she followed an instinct deeper than conscious thought, turning left here, right there, until she found herself before massive oak doors carved with wolves running beneath a full moon. She pushed them open to reveal a library that took her breath away. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, more books than she had ever seen in her life. The Everwood pack had little use for reading, believing it distracted Omegas from their primary purpose. Most people need a guide to find this place the first time. The voice came from a corner of the room where an elderly man sat in a chair by the fire. He was perhaps 70, with a weathered face and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. His right leg was stretched out before him, and he leaned on a cane inlaid with silver. Yet here you are without a single wrong turn, if I'm not mistaken. Vivian hesitated in the doorway. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. The old man waved a dismissive hand. Nonsense. The library belongs to those who appreciate it. I'm Walter, advisor to the king and general nuisance, according to the younger warriors who think old means feeble. His smile was quick and sharp. I served with the 7th Infantry Division in Korea. Learned there that survival often depends on seeing what others miss. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Join me. Vivian approached cautiously and sat. Up close, she could see that Walter wore the faded tattoos of a beta warrior along his forearms, and his cane was not merely decorative but necessary for the leg that had clearly been badly injured. You're the Omega Richard found in the storm, he said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. Quite the stir you've caused. He hasn't brought anyone back from his wanderings since the Queen died. I'm not sure why he bothered, Vivian said quietly. Walter studied her for a long moment. I've lived through many ages, girl, and rarely have I seen someone find this library without being shown the way. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me, what else do you find without being told where to look? Vivian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had spent her entire life hiding what she could do, the ability to sense truth in lies, to find what was lost, to know things she shouldn't. It had brought her nothing but trouble in Everwood. I don't know what you mean, she said carefully. Walter's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. No, I suppose you wouldn't admit it easily, not after what they did to you. He sat back. I won't press, but know this: in Gray Mountain, gifts are not punished. They are treasured. Before she could respond, the library doors opened and Richard entered. He stopped short at the sight of them together, then continued forward with a slight smile. I see you've met Walter. Just becoming acquainted, Walter replied, not rising from his seat. The familiarity with which he addressed the king spoke of long years of friendship. She found the library on her first try, Richard. Something passed between the two men, an understanding that excluded her. Richard turned to Vivian. How are you feeling today? Better, she said. Thank you for the clothes and accommodations. They're yours for as long as you wish to stay. He glanced around the library. Do you read? The question held no judgment, only curiosity. Yes, Vivian admitted. Whenever I could find books, which wasn't often. Walter snorted. Everwood pack, led by that fool Calder. More concerned with breeding than brains. No offense, he added, nodding to Vivian. None taken, she replied, surprised to find she maenited. The name of her former alpha no longer held the power to make her flinch. He wasn't known for his love of literature. Richard's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. The library is open to all in the fortress. Feel free to read whatever interests you. Thank you, Vivian said, meaning it. In that moment, the books around her represented more freedom than she had ever known. As the days turned to weeks, Vivian fell into a rhythm within Graymountain Fortress. Each morning, she helped Eleanor with sorting herbs and preparing medicines, discovering she had a knack for finding the rarest plants even when the healer had given up the search. Afternoons she spent in the library with Walter, who told her stories of the 5 major pacts under Richard's rule, of the politics and alliances that kept the Northern Territories peaceful. She learned that Richard had united the territories through diplomacy rather than war, a rarity among werewolves. That he had been mated to Sarah, daughter of the Eastern Ridge Pack, in a union that secured peace after generations of conflict. That the loss of Sarah and their unborn son had nearly broken him, sending him into the solitary wanderings that had eventually led him to Vivian. She also learned about the moon goddess worship that formed the spiritual core of pack life in the north. Unlike Everwood, where the goddess was invoked mainly to bless matings and births, here she was seen as the source of all gifts, including those that had nothing to do with reproduction. The old ways teach that the moon goddess appears in 3 aspects, Walter explained one snowy afternoon. Maiden, mother, and crone. Most packs honor only the mother aspect, forgetting that the maiden represents freedom and possibility, while the crone embodies wisdom and foresight. Everwood only cared about the mother, Vivian said quietly. Most do. Walter's gaze was piercing, but those with gifts like yours often find their connection to the maiden or the crone stronger. Again, that sense that he knew more than he was saying. Vivian had begun to suspect that Walter had been placed in the library deliberately to watch her, though, whether for her protection or the pack's, she wasn't certain. Each evening, Richard would join them for the final meal of the day. At first, his presence was intimidating, but gradually Vivian found herself looking forward to these times. He rarely spoke of pack business, instead asking her opinions on the books she was reading or sharing stories of the territories beyond the fortress walls. She noticed that among his own people, he maintained a careful distance, respected, even loved, but separate, as if he held something of himself in reserve, afraid to give too much lest he lose it again. On the 20th day of her stay at Graymountain, everything changed. She was in the great hall, seated at the high table with Eleanor and Walter, when a commotion erupted at the main doors. A messenger burst through snow, still clinging to his cloak, his expression urgent. Sire Alpha Calder of the Everwood Pack requests an audience. He's at the gates with 20 warriors. The hall fell silent. Vivian's blood turned cold. Richard, seated at the center of the high table, turned to her, his amber eyes questioning. "You're Alpha," he said quietly. "The one who chained you to the pillar." "Yes," her voice shook despite her effort to steady it. "He's come to finish what the storm didn't." Richard stood, his presence filling the space in a way that made every wolf turn toward him. "Tell Alpha Calder I will see him in the council chamber alone." He glanced at Walter, who had already risen, his hand on his cane, his back straighter than his years should allow. "Double the guard on the eastern tower. No one enters except Eleanor." "Sire," Walter began, his expression concerned. "Do it." As Richard turned to leave, Vivian caught his arm. The contact sent a shock through her like static electricity, but warmer, deeper. He looked down at her hand, then at her face, his expression unreadable. "He'll demand my return," she said urgently. "He'll say I'm pack property, that you have no right to keep me." "He can demand whatever he wishes," Richard replied, his voice cold as the mountain wind. "But pack law ends at my borders, and I do not return wolves to those who would kill them." He left the hall with Walter at his side, moving with the deliberate calm of a predator who has already decided how the hunt will end. Vivian sat frozen, the food turning to ash in her mouth. Around her, the warriors resumed their meals, but their hands stayed close to their weapons, and their conversations carried the edge of readiness. Eleanor appeared at her shoulder. "Come back to your chambers. I want to know what happens." "You will, but not by standing in the line of fire." The healer's voice gentled. "Trust him, child. Richard did not survive 20 years as king by letting bullies take what's his." The council chamber was built for intimidation. High ceilings, cold stone, and a single throne carved from black mountain granite. Richard sat upon it now, every inch the Alpha King, while Calder paced before him like a caged wolf. "She is Everwood property," Calder growled. He was a broad man with a permanent sneer. His brown beard unkempt, his eyes too close together. "You have no claim to her." "She is a wolf who sought sanctuary in my territory," Richard replied, his voice level. "And I have every claim to offer protection to those who request it. She's barren, cursed. Her presence weakens the pack. Her presence weakens nothing but your pride." Richard leaned forward slightly. "You chained her to die because you feared what her existence said about your leadership. That's not pack law. That's murder dressed in tradition." Calder's eyes flashed dangerously. "You call me murderer, you who let your own mate die in childbirth." The temperature in the room dropped. Walter's hand moved to his sword, but Richard raised one finger, stopping him. "My mate died bringing life into this world," Richard said softly, each word precise as a blade. "You tried to kill a woman for failing to do the same. We are not the same, Calder. And if you speak of Sarah again, I will teach you the difference between grief and cowardice personally." Calder stepped back, reassessing. He had come expecting intimidation to work both ways, but he had miscalculated. The grieving king was still a king, and his mercy had limits. "What do you want?" Calder asked finally. "Nothing from you. You'll return to Everwood territory and forget she exists. In return, I won't send word to the Council of Alphas about your creative interpretation of pack law." "She's worthless." "Then you've lost nothing." Richard's voice was final. Calder's jaw clenched. He knew he had no leverage, no allies in this frozen fortress. "If she returns voluntarily, will you stop her?" "She won't." "You can't know that." "I know that wolves who have tasted freedom rarely return to chains." Richard stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Go home, Calder. Tend to the pack you still have, and pray the goddess is more forgiving than I am." After Calder departed with his warriors, their threats muttered too low for formal insult, but loud enough for pride, Richard returned to his chambers to find Vivian waiting. Eleanor had brought her there, judging it safer than her own room should Calder attempt something foolish. "He's gone," Richard said without preamble, "and he won't be back soon." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise that if he tries, he'll learn why this kingdom has held for 300 years. Vivian stood by the fire, her arms wrapped around herself. In the flickering light, with her dark hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes reflecting the flames, she looked both vulnerable and fierce. Something stirred in Richard, an emotion he had thought died with Sarah. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for defending me." "I defended what was right. You needn't thank me for that." She studied him for a long moment, then asked the question that had been building since the night he found her. "What do you really want from me, Alpha King? No one offers sanctuary without expectation." Richard moved to stand before her close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Tell me about your gift," he said, his voice low. "The one you've been hiding since you were old enough to know it made you dangerous." Vivian went still, her breath caught. "How did you—" "Because I've spent 3 years learning to see what others miss. And I see you, Vivian. The way you watch people. The way you know things you shouldn't. The way you found the library on your first day out of your chambers when it's hidden behind 3 false corridors." He leaned forward. "You're a Pathfinder." The word hung between them, ancient and forbidden. "I don't know what you're talking about," Vivian whispered. "Yes, you do. You can sense truth from lies. Find what's lost. See connections others miss. It's why your pack called you cursed. They couldn't control what you might discover about them." His voice gentled. "I'm right, aren't I?" Vivian's hands twisted in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Since I was 7, I knew the beta's mate was betraying him before he did. I knew the alpha's son was stealing from the pack stores. I knew my own mother was sick before the healers found the cancer." She looked up, tears tracking down her cheeks. "Knowing changes nothing. It only makes you dangerous to people who profit from secrets, or invaluable to those who value truth." Richard held her gaze. "I need a Pathfinder, Vivian. This kingdom is vast and lies grow like weeds in the cracks. If you're willing, I would make you my seeker. You would have protection, purpose, and power." "Why would you trust me?" "Because 3 nights ago I asked the goddess for a sign that redemption was still possible," he said softly, "and she sent me you." Winter deepened around Graymountain Fortress, and with it Vivian's role transformed. Richard had not made her his seeker in name alone. Each morning she attended the council sessions, sitting at his right hand, while nobles and warriors presented their disputes. The stone chamber, with its high-arched windows and ancient tapestries depicting the first werewolf kings, became the stage for her new life. At first they resented her presence. This barren Omega who had no bloodline, no pack standing, no right to such a position. They kept their thoughts hidden behind courteous words, but Vivian felt their disdain like a physical sensation against her skin. Then she began to speak. "Lord Haken is lying about the border incursion," she said quietly during one session, leaning close to Richard so only he could hear. The noble in question, a bulky man with elaborate braids in his beard, was in the middle of describing how the Riverlands pack had violated his hunting grounds. Richard's amber eyes flickered to her face. "Are you certain?" "I can feel it," she murmured. "The truth sits different than lies. His words are smooth, but there's a wrongness underneath, like meat gone bad beneath pretty wrapping." Richard nodded once, then turned his attention back to Lord Haken, who had finished his complaint and now awaited judgment. "Lady Vivian suggests there might be more to this story," Richard said, his tone deceptively mild. "Would you submit to her questioning?" Hawken's face flushed. "With all respect, my king failed to see why an outsider's opinion should factor into pack matters. She is my seeker, Lord Haken, my eyes when I cannot see, my ears when whispers are too faint." Richard's voice remained pleasant, but steel ran beneath it. "Humor me." The noble bowed stiffly. "As you wish, sire." Vivian rose and approached him, conscious of every eye in the room upon her. This was her first public test. If she failed, her position would be undermined before it had even truly begun. "You claim the Riverlands wolves crossed your border first," she said, holding Haken's gaze. That they hunted deer on your lands without permission. Yes, his eyes narrowed. That is what happened. Vivian circled him slowly, letting her gift unfurl. She had spent years suppressing it, but now with Richard's encouragement, she allowed it to flow freely. The sensation was like diving into clear water, seeing beneath the surface to what lay hidden. You wanted their timber rights, she said suddenly, the old growth forest that spans both territories. You thought a small war would give you leverage to take it. She met his furious gaze. Your men crossed first. They killed Riverland's game and left the carcasses to rot, knowing it would provoke retaliation. The silence that followed was profound. Hawkins' face contorted between rage and fear as his lies unraveled before the entire court. Lord Haken, Richard said softly, you have 3 days to return the land you took and compensate the Riverlands Pack for their losses, or I will declare you oath-broken and strip your title. Haken left in rage, but he complied. Word spread quickly through the kingdom. The Alpha King had found himself a Pathfinder, and lies would no longer shelter in his halls. Walter found Vivian in the library that evening, her face buried in an ancient text about the history of Pathfinders among werewolf kind. You made quite an impression today, he said, lowering himself carefully into his usual chair by the fire. His leg troubled him more in the cold weather, and he did not try to hide the grimace of pain as he stretched it before him. I exposed a liar, she replied, not looking up from her book. It's what Richard asked me to do. And you did it with grace and precision. Walter studied her. But it took something from you, didn't it? Now she did look up, startled by his perception. How did you know? I've seen it before. In Korea, we had a scout in our unit. Not a Pathfinder like you, but something similar. He could sense ambushes before they happened, knew which local villagers we could trust. The old man's eyes grew distant with memory. Each warning saved lives, but it cost him. By the end of the war, he looked a decade older than his years. Vivian closed her book. It's like carrying someone else's weight for a while. I feel their intentions, their emotions, the things they're trying to hide. It lingers. Walter nodded. The mind isn't meant to hold so many truths at once, especially those people buried deep. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. Elderflower tea. Eleanor prepared it for you. It helps clear the residue of others from your thoughts. She took the pouch, touched by their concern. Thank you. You should also know, Walter added, his tone deliberately casual, that Richard hasn't left the fortress since you agreed to be his seeker. What do you mean? For 3 years, he's wandered the borders for days at a time, unable to stay within these walls for more than a week without feeling trapped by memories. Walter's eyes, sharp despite his age, held hers. But since you arrived, he hasn't felt the need to escape. Perhaps he's finding something here worth staying for. Vivian felt heat rise to her cheeks. We work well together, that's all. Walter's smile was knowing. Of course, that's all. Days passed, then weeks. The rhythm of life at Graymountain became familiar, comfortable. Each morning in council, each afternoon in study, each evening in quiet conversation with Richard, Walter, and occasionally Eleanor. The Pathfinder books revealed a long history of those with her gift, though most stories ended tragically. Pathfinders were often feared, used for their abilities, then discarded when they became inconvenient. Few lived past 30, their minds eventually overwhelmed by the constant bombardment of others' truths. She did not share this discovery with Richard or Walter, though she suspected they already knew. Instead, she focused on developing control, learning to open her gift when needed and close it when not. Richard, too, was changing. The distant king, who rarely smiled, now occasionally laughed at Walter's dry observations. He lingered after meals, engaging Vivian in discussions about books or pack politics. His wanderlust seemed to have abated, replaced by a new attentiveness to fortress life. The nobles noticed. Whispers began about the influence the Omega Pathfinder held over their king. Some said she had bewitched him, others that she was a spy for Calder, still others that she was using her position to accumulate power. Vivian ignored them, focusing instead on the work that brought her unexpected fulfillment. Then came the night that changed everything. Vivian woke, gasping, images burning behind her eyes. Raiders planning an attack on the western villages. She could see them clearly. 30 men strong-armed with silver weapons meant to wound werewolves fatally. They would strike at dawn 3 days from now, burning homes and taking hostages for ransom. She didn't bother with a robe over her nightgown, running barefoot through the cold stone corridors to Richard's chambers. The guards, now accustomed to her position, let her pass without question. She knocked once urgently, then pushed open the door without waiting for a response. Richard was awake, standing by the fire in loose sleeping trousers, his chest bare. The scars of many battles marked his skin, telling stories of a life spent in combat. He turned at her entrance, surprise giving way to concern at her obvious distress. "Vivian, what's wrong?" "The western border." She gasped, the vision still so vivid it was hard to separate from reality. "There's going to be an attack 3 days from now at dawn. Human raiders. They're planning to burn the villages, take hostages." She looked up at him, and her eyes hollow with the weight of what she'd seen. "I can see it so clearly, the smoke, the screaming, but I don't know how to stop it." Richard closed the distance between them, his hands gripping her shoulders gently but firmly, grounding her in the present. "You've already stopped it by telling me. I'll send warriors tonight. They'll be waiting when the raiders come." His certainty steadied her racing heart. This was the difference between Graymountain and Everwood here. Her visions weren't dismissed as female hysteria or dark magic. Here they were acted upon without question. "Come," he said, guiding her to a chair by the fire. "Tell me everything you saw. Every detail matters." She described the vision as he called for a servant, ordering preparation for an immediate war party. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories would not allow his people to be harmed while he had the power to prevent it. "I'll lead them myself," he said once she had finished. "We'll depart within the hour." "I want to come with you," Vivian found herself saying. Richard shook his head. "Too dangerous. I might see something else, something that could help, and I know exactly where they plan to attack." She stood, determination straightening her spine. "You made me your seeker. Let me seek." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Be ready to ride in 30 minutes. Walter will accompany us." True to his word, the old warrior was already in the courtyard when they arrived, mounted on a sturdy gray stallion. Despite his age and injured leg, he sat straight in the saddle, a sword at his hip, and the steady gaze of a man who had seen war before and was not afraid to see it again. "The young pups tried to leave me behind," he greeted them with a wry smile. "Told them these old bones still know how to fight, and these old eyes still see farther than theirs in the dark." 20 warriors accompanied them, elite fighters handpicked by Richard himself. They rode hard through the night, snow crunching beneath their horses' hooves, breath fogging in the bitter cold. Vivian, unused to long rides, gritted her teeth against the discomfort. The vision of burning villages drove her forward when her body wanted to surrender to exhaustion. They reached the Western Territories by nightfall the next day, making camp in the forest overlooking the valley, where 5 small werewolf settlements lay nestled among the pines. Richard sent scouts to alert the village alphas, ordering quiet evacuations of the most vulnerable. "We don't want to tip off the raiders that we know they're coming," he explained as they gathered around the fire. "The women, children, and elders will be moved to safety. The rest will help us lay a trap." Walter, sitting across from them, nodded in approval. Ambushing the ambushers. Classic strategy. They spent the next day in preparation, positioning fighters in the trees and houses, creating choke points where the raiders would be vulnerable. Through it all, Richard moved with the calm assurance of a leader who had seen battle many times. He knew each warrior by name, understood their strengths, and positioned them accordingly. Vivian watched him, seeing for the first time not just the king, but the warrior. This was the man who had united 5 fractious territories through a combination of diplomacy and, when necessary, force. This was the alpha who had earned the loyalty of wolves like Walter, whose respect was not easily given. The night before the attack, she found Richard standing alone on a ridge overlooking the sleeping villages. Stars scattered across the sky, brilliant in the clear mountain air. He turned at her approach, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You should be resting," he said. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "So should you." She moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "I've never been able to sleep before battle." A smile touched his lips briefly. Too many possibilities to consider. They stood in silence for a moment, the vastness of the night sky making their concerns seem both significant and infinitesimally small. "The gift takes its toll on you," he said finally. "Not a question." "Yes. I've noticed the headaches, the exhaustion after council sessions." His voice held concern, not accusation. "Walter says you're studying the history of Pathfinders." They don't tend to live long, she admitted, seeing no point in hiding what he likely already knew. The constant input eventually overwhelms most of them. Richard turned to face her fully. That won't happen to you. You can't know that. I can, because you won't carry it alone. He took her hand carefully as if she might break. The touch sent warmth racing up her arm, settling somewhere beneath her ribs. Vivian, you can't bear every truth alone. It will destroy you. What choice do I have? If I ignore it, people die. You share it. You let others bear the weight with you. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. You let me bear it with you. She wanted to pull away to maintain the distance that had kept her safe her entire life. But she was so tired and his hand was warm, and for the first time since she could remember, someone was offering to share her burden instead of blaming her for it. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I, Richard admitted, but we'll learn together. The attack came exactly as foreseen. Richard's warriors were waiting hidden in the forest when the raider struck. The battle was brief and decisive. The attackers routed before they could reach the villages. No innocents died, no homes burned. When it was over, Richard found Vivian standing in a clearing, her face lifted to the snow that fell soft and constant. You saved them, she said without turning. We saved them. He stopped beside her, following her gaze to the dark sky. Your gift, my action. That's how this works. In my pack, they would have called it witchcraft. Burn me for it. In my kingdom, we call it prophecy, and we honor those who carry it. He was quiet for a moment. Vivian, I need to tell you something. She turned to face him, noting the unusual hesitation in his voice. I've been feeling it too, he said. The pull between us. It's not just gratitude or alliance. The goddess doesn't work that way. He took a breath. I think she's offering us a second chance, both of us. But I need to know if you feel it as well, or if I'm seeing patterns in chaos because I'm desperate to believe redemption is possible. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. She had felt it, of course, from the moment he had shattered her chains. She had felt the invisible thread drawing her to him, but she had told herself it was gratitude's circumstance, the natural bond between savior and saved. She had lied to herself because the truth was too dangerous. I feel it, she admitted, but Richard, I can't give you what Sarah did. I can't give you heirs, a legacy, any of the things a king needs. I don't need heirs, he said quietly. I need a partner who sees truth and isn't afraid to speak it. I need someone who understands that strength isn't just power, it's also mercy. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something raw and honest. I need you, Vivian, not your womb. You. The words broke something inside her, some wall she had built from years of being measured and found wanting. What if I fail you, she whispered. What if we fail together, he countered. Isn't that better than succeeding alone? She laughed, the sound wet with tears she hadn't realized were falling. That's a terrible sales pitch for a queen. Then it's good I'm not asking you to be a queen. I'm asking you to be my mate, my equal, my Pathfinder, and my redemption. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. What do you say, Vivian of the Northern Kingdom? Will you take a chance on a broken king who's trying to remember how to be whole? She looked into his amber eyes and saw her own fractured hope reflected back. Yes, she breathed. Yes. When he kissed her soft and reverent beneath the falling snow, the fortress bells began to ring without command, as if the stones themselves recognized that something sacred was being born in the cold. Walter found them like that, his approach deliberately noisy to avoid surprising them. His weathered face held a mixture of satisfaction and genuine happiness. About time, he said gruffly. Thought I might die of old age waiting for you two to figure it out. Richard laughed, the sound startling in its freedom. Your opinion wasn't requested, old man. Never stopped me before. Walter's eyes were kind as they rested on Vivian. The moon goddess works in circles, child. What begins in darkness often ends in light. The journey back to Graymountain was lighter somehow, despite the cold and the aftermath of battle. News of the successful defense traveled ahead of them, and by the time they reached the fortress, celebrations were already underway. The mood only heightened when Richard, in the middle of the great hall, with hundreds of witnesses, formally announced his intention to take Vivian as his mate. The mating ceremony took place under the full moon in the ancient stone circle at the heart of the fortress. Tradition demanded witnesses, so the entire kingdom gathered, thousands of wolves filling the courtyard, and spilling into the surrounding terraces. But for Vivian, there was only Richard. Only the moment when he took her hand and spoke the old words with a voice that shook with something deeper than duty. I bind myself to you not in ownership, but in partnership. I offer you my strength when yours falters, my truth when doubt clouds your path, my life as shield and shelter. What I am I share with you. What you are I honor completely. Vivian repeated the vows, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was claiming. A barren Omega becoming the mate of a king. It should have been impossible, a violation of every natural law. But the moon shone bright overhead, and when the pack howled their acceptance, the sound was not reluctant but joyful. Eleanor stepped forward with the ceremonial bowl, the one used for royal matings for 3 centuries. Inside swirled a mixture of wine and blood-old magic that bound souls as well as lives. They drank together and felt the connection slam into place, a golden thread that tied her heart to his breath to hers. She gasped at the intensity, at the sudden awareness of his emotions, his thoughts, the shape of his soul. He felt broken and mended simultaneously, guilt and hope warring for dominance. But underneath it all was something solid and unchanging. His absolute conviction that this was right, that she was meant to be his, that the goddess had not abandoned them after all. When the ceremony ended, Richard led her to the tower, to rooms that had been his alone for 3 years. He closed the door, gently shutting out the world, and turned to face her. Are you afraid? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. But not of you. Of what then? Of waking up and finding this was a dream, of being sent back to the pillar, of discovering I'm not enough. The fears tumbled out, impossible to hold back now that the mate bond had opened her to him completely. Richard pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. You are enough, he said fiercely. You are more than enough, and I will spend every day proving that to you until you believe it. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's boundaries and needs. There was grief in it for what they had both lost, but also joy, fierce and unexpected. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the firelight, and Vivian felt for the first time in her life completely safe. I have a confession, Richard said, running his fingers through her hair. I've been waiting for you since the day Sarah died. I didn't know it was you specifically, but I knew there was someone. He kissed her forehead. The goddess whispered it to me in my dreams, told me that loss wasn't the end, only transition, that I needed to hold on just a little longer. Vivian propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face. Do you think Sarah would approve? I think Sarah would be furious that I waited 3 years instead of living. He smiled sadly. She used to tell me I thought too much about duty and not enough about joy. She would have liked you. You both had the same gift for seeing through my nonsense. I wish I could have known her. You know her through me, he said softly. The best parts of who I am, she helped shape. He touched her cheek. And now you're helping me remember them. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Vivian's life. She attended council meetings as Richard's official mate, helped him navigate the political tangles of ruling, and used her gift to root out corruption and lies. The kingdom flourished under their combined leadership, disputes resolved fairly, justice served without cruelty. But happiness is never permanent when old grudges simmer beneath the surface. Calder returned in the dead of winter, not with warriors this time, but with lawyers and ancient scrolls that predated the current kingdom. He demanded an audience with the Council of Alphas, claiming that Richard had violated sacred pack law by sheltering stolen property. The council convened in Graymountain Fortress, 12 Alphas from across the territories, each powerful enough to threaten Richard's rule if they united against him. Walter stood behind Richard's chair, his presence a reminder of the old ways and the respect they carried. Eleanor sat with Vivian, a silent support, as they listened to Calder present his case. The law is clear, Calder declared, his voice carrying to the rafters of the council chamber. An Omega who is pack-born remains pack property until death or formal release. Richard interfered with Everwood justice, stole what was rightfully ours, and elevated a barren wolf to a position she has no natural claim to. He looked directly at Richard. I demand her return or formal censure of your kingdom. The chamber erupted in debate. Some Alphas agreed with Calder, citing tradition and the sanctity of pack law. Others argued that Richard had acted within his rights as sovereign ruler. The discussion grew, heated voices, rising hands moving to weapons. Richard stood and the room fell silent. Before you decide my fate, I ask that you allow Vivian to speak. This concerns her life, and she has a right to defend it. The Alphas agreed, curiosity overriding protocol. Vivian stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. She looked at each Alpha in turn, then at Calder, then at the assembled crowd. Walter gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. I was not stolen, she said. I was saved. There is a difference, though I understand why some of you cannot see it. She paused. You want to know if I'm worthy of being a queen? Here is my answer. I am a Pathfinder. I can see truth in lies, find what is lost, sense connections others miss. Alpha Richard didn't elevate me out of pity. He elevated me because I'm useful, because my gift serves this kingdom better than any ability to bear children ever would. She turned to Calder. You chained me to die because you feared what I might reveal about you. And you were right to fear. I know about the tributes you skim from your pack. I know about the wolves you've exiled for questioning your authority. I know about the deal you made with the Eastern Raiders to sell them safe passage through Everwood territory in exchange for a cut of their plunder. Calder's face went white, then red. Lies. Prove it, Vivian said coldly. Submit to a truth reading. Let a neutral Pathfinder examine your memories. If I'm lying, I'll return to Everwood willingly. But if I'm not, you'll be stripped of your title and exiled as the criminal you are. The chamber went absolutely silent. Calder looked around, seeing no allies, no escape. He had gambled everything on ancient law and lost it to simple truth. Without another word, he turned and fled the council chamber, disappearing into the winter night with a handful of loyal followers. The council formally dissolved his claim to Everwood leadership and granted Richard the right to appoint a new alpha. More importantly, they recognized Vivian's position as legitimate in establishing a precedent that would reshape pack law for generations. But the victory came with a cost. The strain of exposing Calder's crimes had pushed Vivian's gift to its limit. She had reached so deep into his memories, pulled forth so many hidden truths, that something had cracked inside her. The visions came constantly now, day and night, an endless flood of information she couldn't filter or control. She saw a child drowning in the southern rivers, a warrior betraying his alpha in the western mountains, a healer poisoning patients to steal their inheritance, a merchant beating his daughter in the eastern trading posts. Vivian saw everything all at once, and it was destroying her. Richard found her in their chambers, curled on the floor, hands pressed to her temples, tears streaming down her face. Make it stop, she begged. Please, Richard, make it stop. He gathered her into his arms, holding her, while she shook with the force of the visions cascading through her mind. Through their mate bond, he felt echoes of her pain, fragments of the overwhelming flood of information crashing against her consciousness. Eleanor, he shouted. The healer came running, taking in the situation with one practiced glance. Her weathered face creased with concern as she knelt beside them. Her gift is consuming her, Eleanor said, her voice grim. She's opened herself too wide, and now she can't close the door. How do we help her? Richard's voice was raw with fear, his arms tightening around Vivian as another wave of visions racked her body. I don't know. Eleanor's expression was pained as she placed a cool hand on Vivian's forehead. I'm not a Pathfinder. I don't understand how the gift works. Walter appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane, his face ashen. We need someone who does, he said. Someone who's survived this. Richard's mind raced. There was only one person he knew who might have answers. Elder Nadine, he whispered. The reclusive Pathfinder who lived in the sacred grove 3 days north in the mountains of Wyoming. She had trained his grandmother, had lived for over a century, and had not left her grove in 50 years. Watch her, he told Eleanor and Walter. I'm going to get help. Sire, the roads are impossible this time of year, Walter protested. The mountain passes will be blocked with snow. Then I'll run them as a wolf. Richard kissed Vivian's forehead, whispering against her skin. Hold on, I'm coming back with answers, I promise. He shifted into his wolf form, massive and black, with eyes that burned amber even in this shape. Without another glance back, he raced from the room, from the fortress, into the howling winter beyond. He ran without stopping, covering in hours what would take days for a human traveler. The snow was deep, the wind bitter, but the wolf in him gloried in the challenge. This was what he was made for, to run, to hunt, to protect what was his. The sacred grove was hidden behind veils of old magic, But Richard had been there once as a child when his grandmother was still alive. The path remembered him subtle markers in the landscape, guiding him north and west deeper into the wilderness. By the second day, even his supernatural stamina began to flag. He pushed onward, ignoring the burning in his muscles, the ice forming on his fur. Vivian needed him. He would not fail her. Walter, meanwhile, sat vigil by Vivian's bedside. Despite Eleanor's insistence that he rest, he refused to leave. "I've seen something like this before," he told her, as they watched Vivian writhe in the grip of another vision. "Not a Pathfinder, but a scout in Korea who pushed his gift too far." "What happened to him?" Eleanor asked quietly. Walter's eyes darkened with memory. "He lived, but he was never the same. The things he saw, they stayed with him. He couldn't unsee them." "Richard will find Nadine," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. "She'll know what to do. If anyone can reach her, it's him." Walter adjusted the blankets around Vivian's trembling form. "But we need to keep her anchored until then. Talk to her, tell her stories. Give her something to hold on to besides the visions." Eleanor nodded understanding. They took turns speaking to Vivian Walter, sharing tales of battles long past Eleanor, recounting the healing properties of every plant in her vast knowledge. Whether Vivian could hear them through the chaos in her mind, they couldn't tell. But they continued anyway, their voices a lifeline to reality. On the third day, Richard reached the sacred grove. The snow stopped abruptly at its boundary as if an invisible dome protected it from the elements. Ancient trees, their barks silvered with age, formed concentric circles around a central clearing. The air hummed with power old enough that even his wolf form recognized and respected it. He shifted back to human, naked and exhausted, but driven by desperation. "Elder Nadine," he called, his voice carrying in the unnatural stillness. "I am Richard, crowned in winter, and I beg your aid." Silence answered him. Then a voice, ancient, impatient, seemed to come from the trees themselves. "I know who you are, young king. I have been expecting you." Elder Nadine emerged from the grove like a memory taking solid form. She was impossibly old, her skin like carved wood, her eyes a silver that reflected nothing and everything. A shawl of woven moonlight draped her shoulders, the only concession to the winter, beyond her sanctuary. But there was no frailty in her bearing, no weakness in her presence. "My mate," Richard said, without preamble, too desperate for courtesy. "She's a Pathfinder, and her gift is consuming her. She opened herself too wide, and now she cannot close the door. I need you to teach her control, or she will die." "Yes," Nadine said simply. "I know. I have seen her in my visions for 3 moons now. The barren Omega who will reshape destiny." She gestured for him to follow. "Come. There is much to discuss, and your mate's time grows short." In the heart of the grove, surrounded by ancient stones carved with symbols Richard did not recognize, Nadine explained what Vivian was facing. A Pathfinder who opens without boundaries becomes a conduit for all truth, all pain, all knowledge in the world. She said, her voice matter-of-fact as if discussing the weather. "It is drowning in an infinite ocean with no shore." Nadine's hands moved as she spoke, weaving patterns in the air that seemed to leave traces of light. "Most do not survive the breaking, but your Vivian is strong. She has something to hold on to." Her silver eyes fixed on Richard. "You. That may be enough. What do I do?" The question came out raw, stripped of kingship and pride. "Bring her here. I will teach her to build walls, to choose what she sees and what she ignores. It will take time. It will be painful, but if she survives, her gift will be greater than any Pathfinder in 3 centuries. Nadine fixed her silver gaze on him. "But you must understand what this means, young king. A truly trained Pathfinder cannot lie, cannot hide from truth, cannot be bound by conventional morality. She will see things that will terrify you. She will know secrets you would prefer remained hidden. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," Richard said without hesitation. "Liar." Nadine's lips curved in something that might have been a smile. "But you will be prepared by the time you need to be. The goddess does not make mistakes." Richard returned to Graymountain with Nadine riding behind him, the old woman moving with the supernatural ease of someone who existed partially outside normal reality. They found Vivian barely conscious, burning with fever, her mind fragmenting under the weight of 1,000 truths. Walter stood as they entered, his weathered face showing the strain of the past days. "Richard," he began, then stopped at the sight of Nadine. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by something like awe. Elder. Warrior. Nadine inclined her head slightly. You have seen much since we last met. You know each other, Richard asked, surprised. Korea, 1951, Walter said softly. She found me dying in the snow arrows in my leg and chest. Saved my life, though I never understood why. Because you had not yet served your purpose, Nadine replied simply. She moved to Vivian's bedside, her ancient hands hovering over the younger woman's trembling form. Now I understand why I preserved you. All circles close eventually. Nadine took one look at Vivian and began issuing orders like a general commanding troops. She had Richard carry Vivian to the highest tower, then demanded isolation. No one but him and Eleanor for the next 7 days. The girl needs fewer voices, not more, she explained, and my methods require privacy. What followed was an ordeal that tested every fiber of Richard's faith. Nadine taught Vivian to visualize her gift as a vast library, each truth a book that could be opened or left closed. She taught her to build walls of intention, to filter information, to choose what she needed to know and what was better left hidden. But the teaching required Vivian to dive deeper into the visions, not escape them, to face every terrible truth until she understood its shape and could contain it. Richard held her through the worst of it, listening as she wept over a child she had never met, grieving for strangers whose suffering she could perceive but not prevent. I can't save them all, she sobbed on the fourth night, her body racked with the pain of a mother losing her infant hundreds of miles away. I can see them dying, and I can't save them all. No, Richard said, gently cradling her against his chest. But you don't have to. You only have to share what you see with those who can act. The burden of action belongs to them, not to you. He held her tighter as another wave of grief washed through her. You are not responsible for saving the world, Vivian. You are only responsible for being honest about what you see in it. Nadine watched their exchanges with knowing eyes. He understands better than most, she told Vivian during one of the rare moments when Richard slept. Most men would try to stop your pain. He knows it must be endured to be mastered. How did you learn to control it? Vivian asked, her voice weak, but her mind clearer than it had been in days. I had no choice, Nadine replied. I was 14 when my gift awakened alone in the wilderness after my family was killed by settlers. I had no one to hold me through the breaking. I built my walls, or I died. Her ancient face softened. You are fortunate to have him, to have all of them. The old warrior who defends you without weapons, the healer who knows when to fight and when to surrender. They anchor you to this world when the visions would pull you into another. On the 8th day, Vivian emerged from the tower transformed. The fever was gone, the wild panic in her eyes replaced by something calm and centered. She moved with new confidence, and when she looked at Richard, her gaze was clear and certain. Thank you, she said simply, standing in the doorway of the council chamber, where he sat with Walter, planning the next phase of Everwood's transition. For what? Richard rose, unable to hide his relief at seeing her upright, coherent. For believing I could survive this, for going to find Elder Nadine, for holding me when I thought I was breaking apart. She took his hand, and through their bond, he felt a change in her. Where before there had been chaos, now there was order. Where there had been fear, now there was certainty. I can feel the walls now, the boundaries. I can choose what to see and what to leave alone. It's like learning to close my eyes for the first time. Richard pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, grateful beyond words. Walter watched them with a smile that softened his weathered features, making him look momentarily younger. The pack has missed its queen, he said gruffly, and its king has been insufferable without her. But relief was premature. 3 days after Vivian's emergence, a messenger arrived bearing news that would shatter everything they had built. The message came sealed in wax, bearing the marks of the Western Kingdom's royal house. Richard read it in the privacy of his chambers, with Vivian and Walter waiting anxiously. War, he said quietly, crumpling the parchment in his fist. King Dominic claims we have violated territorial agreements by appointing a new alpha to Everwood. He's mobilizing his armies and moving toward our borders. Vivian's blood went cold. Over a pack leadership. Over an excuse. Richard replied, his amber eyes hard. He's been looking for justification to expand his territory for years. This is convenient timing. What will you do? Walter asked, his old warrior's face grim with the prospect of battle. Richard was silent for a long moment. I could hold our borders against invasion. We're strong enough, but thousands would die, and in the end I'm not sure we could win against their numbers. He turned to face them, and Vivian saw the terrible weight of kingship in his eyes. Or I could negotiate, offer concessions, prevent war through sacrifice. What kind of concessions? Vivian asked, though she already sensed the answer through her newly controlled gift. He's demanded that I surrender the new Everwood Alpha and return to the old territorial boundaries, which would give him control of the southern timber routes. Richard paused, his jaw clenching. And he's demanded you. Vivian went very still. Me, as a diplomatic hostage to ensure our compliance and to prove the good faith of the agreement. Richard's hands fisted at his sides. He knows about your gift. He wants a Pathfinder in his court. You won't agree to that, Walter protested. If it prevents war, I may have no choice. The words seemed to cost Richard everything. Vivian, I can't condemn thousands to death to keep you safe. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. Vivian's mind raced, feeling the true shape of the problem through her gift. He doesn't actually want me, she said slowly. He wants insurance that you won't move against him. A Pathfinder would make you predictable to him. He'd assume I'd warn you of his plans, so he'd have to move openly. It actually weakens his position to have me. Then why demand you, Walter asked. Because he knows I matter to Richard, Vivian replied. Because he knows that separating us will weaken his resolve. She gripped Richard's hands. What if I go willingly? Absolutely not. The Alpha's voice was final. Listen to me. Vivian held his gaze. If I go as part of a peace agreement, I'll be valuable. But if I go as a hostage, I'll be just another prisoner. And she could feel the shape of her future unfold through her gift, multiple paths branching into different outcomes. One led to war and death. Another led to something else entirely, something that required her to be brave enough to walk into danger alone. I'll use the time to learn his weaknesses, his true plans, his vulnerabilities, she continued. And when the moment comes, I'll send word back to you. No, I won't lose you. Richard's grip on her hands tightened. You won't lose me. I'll find my way back. I always do. She pulled him closer, pressing her forehead to his. This is what my gift is for Richard. Not just seeing Charles, but using it. Trust me. He held her at arm's length, searching her face. Whatever he saw there, whatever certainty radiated from her, finally broke through his resistance. If you don't send word within 3 moons, I'm coming for you, he said fiercely, and I'll burn the Western Kingdom to ash to get you back. 3 moons, she agreed, but I'll need to send word sooner. I'll need your help. The agreement was made in secret. Richard would formally surrender to the Western King's demands, offering concessions and agreeing to the hostage exchange. Vivian would go to the Western Court, but not without preparation. Nadine stayed at Graymountain to teach her additional techniques. How to mask her gift, how to appear weaker than she was, how to plant subtle suggestions in people's minds without them realizing they were being influenced. Your gift is not just about seeing truth, Nadine explained, as they sat in the high tower, surrounded by candles that burned with silver flames. It is about understanding the shape of what people need to believe and helping them believe it. She smiled that strange ancient smile. Use that carefully, child. The line between guidance and manipulation is thinner than you think. Walter offered his own form of preparation drawn from his experiences as a prisoner of war. Never show fear, he advised. That's what they want most. Keep your mind focused on home, on returning. Count the days, observe routines, find allies where you can. The old warrior presented her with a small knife designed to be hidden in the seam of a dress. I carried this through 18 months of captivity, he said gruffly. It saved my life twice. May you never need to use it. The day of the exchange, Vivian dressed in formal robes of state, a queen's clothing that marked her as valuable. Eleanor wove protective herbs into her braided hair, whispering ancient blessings with each twist. Richard held her one final time outside the gates where the Western King's emissaries could see them together but not hear their whispered words. I love you, she said the first time she had spoken the words aloud. I love you, he replied. Come back to me, always. As she rode toward the Western Kingdom, Vivian felt the connection between them stretch thin but unbroken. Through their mate bond, she could feel his anguish, his faith, his absolute conviction that this would end with her return. She clung to that certainty as the familiar mountains fell away behind her. The Western court was everything she had feared and nothing like she expected. Beautiful and cruel cultured and savage ruled by King Dominic, a man of contradictions, who smiled while making decisions that destroyed lives. Vivian was given rooms in the palace, treated with courteous formality, and watched constantly. But she was also given access. She attended council meetings, festivals, private audiences. She listened and observed and saw the truth beneath every lie. The Western King's plans were more ambitious than Richard had suspected. He wanted not just expansion, but conquest, the complete absorption of the Northern Kingdom into his territory. But he also had weaknesses. A trusted general who disagreed with the expansion strategy, who could be persuaded to defect. A daughter who loved the Northern culture and would influence her father if given the right incentive. Ambitious nobles who would rather negotiate than fight. Fractures in the foundation that could be exploited with the right pressure. On the night of the full moon, Vivian used her gift to send a vision to Richard, a shared dream that crossed the distance between kingdoms. She showed him everything: the Western King's plans, his vulnerabilities, his daughter's secret sympathies, the general's hidden correspondence. When she woke, she felt Richard's response like warmth spreading through her chest. He had received it. He understood. 3 days later, the Western King received a message. His daughter had escaped the palace and was making her way to the Northern Kingdom, carrying documents that proved the Western King's violation of multiple diplomatic treaties. His general had submitted his resignation and refused to command troops against the North. His most ambitious nobles were quietly withdrawing their support for the war effort. And with it came a message written in Richard's own hand: "Return what is mine and we can still negotiate peace. Keep her and I will give you the war you seem so eager for." The Western King raged, but he had been outmaneuvered. Without unified support and with his plans exposed, war had become untenable. He released Vivian with barely concealed fury, sending her back to the Northern Kingdom under escort. When she finally saw Richard riding toward her on the border, she felt the mate bond flare like a sunrise. 3 moons and 1 day, he said, as he pulled her from her horse into his arms. You were cutting it close. I told you I'd find my way back, she replied, laughing through tears. Walter waited for them at Graymountain, leaning heavily on his cane, but standing proud at the fortress gates. His weathered face broke into a rare full smile at the sight of Vivian. Thought you might need this, he said, holding out a leather-bound book. Been collecting stories of Pathfinders while you were gone. Thought the young ones coming to train might want to know about those who came before. In the months that followed, the Northern Kingdom and Western Kingdom negotiated a genuine peace, one based on mutual respect and the recognition that both would be stronger together than divided. The Western King, humbled by his daughter's defection, named her as heir, a girl who would eventually grow into a queen with Vivian as her trusted advisor and friend. But the greatest change happened in the Northern Kingdom itself. Vivian's actions had reshaped pack law. No longer could Omegas be exiled for barrenness. No longer could gifts be hidden and feared. Young Pathfinders began coming to the fortress asking to be trained. Nadine established a formal academy for those who carried her gift. Walter, despite his age, took on the role of history keeper for the academy, ensuring that the hard-won wisdom of the past was not forgotten. Old age has its uses, he told Vivian with a wink. We remember what others are eager to forget. Richard's kingdom became known not just for its strength, but for its wisdom, its justice, its willingness to see value in those others had cast aside. And in the tower where once a broken king had wandered alone, there was now laughter, warmth, and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine. One night, as they stood together on the ramparts, watching the stars emerge above the frozen peaks, Richard turned to Vivian and asked, "Did you ever see this ending when you were chained to that pillar?" "No," she said, resting her head against his shoulder. "I couldn't see anything but the cold in the end. That's the gift and curse of prophecy. We see fragments, never the whole picture." "I'm glad the goddess sent me to that storm," Richard said. "I'm glad I found you." "I'm glad too," Vivian whispered, "because I think I finally understand what the goddess was trying to teach us both." "What's that?" "That redemption isn't something we earn through suffering. It's something we find in each other. That broken things can be mended not by erasing the cracks, but by filling them with gold. That a barren omega and a grieving king can become whole by choosing to be brave enough to love. Richard pulled her close, and under the infinite sky, with the moon shining silver on the snow-covered peaks, they were finally completely home. In the distance, they could see Walter walking with Eleanor along the fortress walls, their gray heads bent close in conversation, two elders who had seen much of life and still found wonder in it. Nearby, young Pathfinders practiced with Nadine in the courtyard, learning to channel their gifts safely. The future, Richard murmured, following Vivian's gaze. It looks different than I imagined. Better infinitely. The Pathfinder and her king stood watch over their kingdom, knowing that whatever challenges came next, they would face them together. The chain that had once bound Vivian to die now lay in the Fortress Museum, a reminder that endings often disguise themselves as beginnings, and that mercy once given returns tenfold to those brave enough to offer it.